So we're going to move to some questions, and a lot of these questions have actually been pre-submitted prior to us getting here. So the team up here have been able to give them a bit of thought and come up with some answers. So we're going to move through those first. But then if you have other questions, feel free to chuck them on Slido. We have got a full hour, so we've got a bit of time to get through some stuff. But we'll start with this first one here that's popped up on the board, and then we'll just move through them and see where we end up. So a serious need for effectively addressing data quality and timing of upload, breeders and bureaus accountability. Sharon.
Yeah, we're really keen on this. We have actually done quite a lot of work. I've gone through with some of the scientists, Cheryl Ann, when she was around, about, what does good data look like, and David has actually written the code to produce some of the answers. I'd say a lot of it is done, but then, we'd like to have more consultation with breeders about, what those are and how reasonable they are. And I personally would like to understand more about what normal looks like for breeders. We have people that don't record anything more than a weaning weight on the ewe lambs until they're adults, but we know that you can go about 30% faster by measuring the ewe lambs for most traits rather than just getting an average of their half-brothers. But just how those numbers pan out, the proportion of animals with later measurements, it'd be nice to have more diagnostics on that. But there will certainly be a consultation period when we get going. David?
No, agreed, and it obviously sits on top of the reporting that we talked about before as well to deliver it out. Jason?
Hey, I'd actually really like to, on the spur of the moment, throw the mic to Dan Brown, if that's all right. And the reason for doing this is I think the Australians are ahead of us in terms of the data quality index or data quality on what's coming in. Dan, I just wonder if you could just give us like a 2-minute summary of where you're at, but also where you're thinking of going in terms of publishing this. And I'd be really keen to get the reaction from everyone in the room as to, is this something that they would endorse or does it scare them?
Yeah, it's something we've been working on for a long time. We've had the metrics for some of the parts or the components of data quality score, as we call it, for a long time. And it's only in recent times we've had the guts to actually release it in something formal because we were worried about the consequences. But it's actually been received really well, and we put a lot of work into understanding various components of data quality and things to try and describe whether people are using the breeding values for selection, a whole range of things into our score to try and encourage people to use the system that's in front of them better. And I think that the response we've got from industry has been really good, and most people are using that information and reporting it, even though we don't publicly report it ourselves. So we give breeders a report, and it's quite detailed, and it sums up to a score out of 1 to 5 and compares them to all the other flocks in the analysis. And I think it's really interesting for us as researchers to understand the data and what's driving change and what drives producers to use information. And I think the motivated producers are showing it to their clients to justify that they're doing a good job and using the system well. So it's actually been a good tool for us and for a lot of breeders, I think. But we are about to embark on a step of making that public and actually more transparently reporting to industry and commercial round buyers what breeders are doing and what they're recording and where they sit for data quality. So that it will be an interesting step, which we plan to embark on soon. But I think we have done a lot of work behind the scenes to actually understand what metrics we can calculate and how to report them, and happy to talk about the details whenever's needed. But I think it's been a much more positive process, and industry have received it much better than I expected.
Yes, thanks, Dan. Really good summary. And so I guess I'm just interested to ask the audience, just everyone's going to put their hand up and say yes or no, but if we went down that track, and it wouldn't be an immediate thing, like Dan's been really careful and cautious about putting that information out to the breeders to give them a chance to look at their own data quality index, address it, etc. But then after some years of that, 2 or 3 years, then going the step of making that a publicly displayed piece of information to distinguish the people that are really putting the effort into the ones that are putting less effort in. Is that something that we would support? Yeah, okay. Andrew just suggested a show of hands. Who would endorse that sort of approach? Well, I think that's it's not unanimous. Like there's some hands not up, but there's a fair. No, it's the people who aren't in the room that are a problem, Kate. Sorry, a couple of points on that.
Sorry. Microphone over here, please.
Hi, I'm newer to this game, and it would be great for us to get feedback to know, like on the data quality, what we need to do better, and what we should be submitting and how we should be doing it. Because at the moment there is a crap load of guessing for somebody that's newer, and I'm going to have a good catch up with Sharon, and I'm lucky I live quite close to her. But I'd love to know how the heck I do better, because the better the data in, obviously the better the data out. The better the data out, the better we can improve our genetics. It's not, I don't know, it doesn't seem like rocket science for a new guy.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Absolutely. And in terms of the work that Sharon's been doing on data quality, so part of it's about how can we give you better visibility over that, but a bit like the connectedness, like what intelligence can we put into that as well, in terms of, we would expect certain data to have shown up at this time of the year as well, to really sort of put some structure around
Yeah, like
that.
if you can tell me exactly what you want, when you want it, how you want it, I mean, it would make my life a lot simpler.
Thank you.
If I could just pick up on that point, I should have mentioned it, but a key part of what we've done with our data quality score and the metrics that go behind them is actually make those recommendations to producers. So we pick out the key three things that we think they're doing really well, or the 3 opportunities to make improvement. And using the report in extension campaigns with breeders has been a really key part of how we've delivered that to industry, not just giving it to them to interpret themselves, supporting the understanding of what the key areas of improvement could be and how they might go about it.
Okay, we'll move on, but
Hang
I
on.
thought I could...
Right, hang on.
Dirk will have his hand up.
I could just add on to that. As a sheep genetics user, they did workshops for us, and I've got a 5-star rating, so that's something that I can use for my advertising. So, yeah, I thoroughly recommend it.
Okay, so a summary there, Jason, for you. I think you've got a strong mandate from the people in this room, but as you point out, there's quite a few of your breeders not here. And as Kate pointed out, maybe they're the ones that might not be so keen on this. So, but there we go. So we'll move on to the second question we got here. Being a specialised lamb finisher and a dedicated ram breeder, I asked the question of if the EMA BV is a good indicator of muscle through the body as it once used to be, or is it just a figure that ram breeders may like to use to self-promote themselves? Neville.
Thanks. So Jason put up a slide that showed the journey that we've gone through with the NZGE, and I think if you looked at all of the gold trait groups, we've gone on a similar journey. And eye muscle area was a really important BV because that was the first measurement that we had. We had ultrasound and we looked at the eye muscle, but we got more advanced measurements such as the meat processor, the various meat processor grading systems and CT scanning that give us distributional information. So our recommendation is the first thing that we would recommend to use is the index. The eye muscle area is no longer an index trait. The weighting goes on the lean meat traits and fatness. So our recommendation would be use the index first. If you don't use that, then if you want to look at individual BVs, then you can look at the hind quarter, the loin and the shoulder lean yield and the carcass yield, and those are more informative. Old habits die hard, and a lot of people like to use the EMA BV, but there's a lot of information that you're kind of missing if you do that. So, we would recommend use the lean meat yield ones to get a good indication of the muscling. They are a lot smaller because they're expressed in kilograms, so the numbers are quite small, but the information is really important.
Excellent. The next one here we go, up on the screen there now for you to have a look at. With the rapid growth of non-shearing sheep as a proportion of the New Zealand sheep flock, when can we expect a reference population to be established? Jason?
I'll take that one. Yeah, good question, Simon. So I guess this isn't the... So we fully support the and want to provide further support to the non-shearing. I like your terminology because there are shedding and there are sheep that just don't grow well. To bring that trait and relevant traits into the overall analysis. In terms of the reference population, the only real out-and-out reference population that we have established at the moment in New Zealand is the South Island Genomic Calibration Flock, which is really the initiative of the Ag Research and PAMU/Focus have established, and a number of people in this room participate in. So I'm going to give an answer to the question in two parts. So later this year, I would like to involve or to have a review of how we approach genomics across the sheep industry. Really asking the question is, are there opportunities for us to be doing things better? So we will do that. That'll be sort of like a science level review. Having said that, that review is not going to make any more money fall out of the sky. And, Dan's already given us the figures of, I think, beef and lamb levy, about $3 million of levy goes into genetics. That's out of a total pool of about 30 million, Dan. So genetics is getting 10% of every dollar of the levy dollars that you pay already, and genomic reference populations are expensive if we construct them as a deliberate design population. The alternative, right, is that that we work with the shedding breeders to establish good connectedness between your own flocks, and that you do genomics in your own flocks and you become your own reference population. And that's sort of that's the default way that we've gone for most other traits, other than meat quality, where you simply can't do it in a breeding flock. So I'd love to tell you that, yeah, we want to, another $600,000 has fallen out of the sky, and we're going to establish a specialist reference population. But I think really it's going to be a bit of a case of having to help yourselves and getting some benefits from genotyping as you go along that process.
So I've been working with the shedding BVs and Roy Costilla at Ag Research, and I was surprised at the number of genotypes we already have on some of these non-shearing breeds. So I think our standard recommendation that you should genotype your sires each year is certainly happening in that group, and something we recommend going forward. And I think, when shedding becomes part of the standard NZGE and we've got version 6 over the line, then there's certainly, with the current genotype breed inclusions that we've got, it's certainly got the potential to be there.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. There's quite a few ways to get to shedding as well. There's the Wiltshire way and the Dorper way, which is probably the East Presian breed background. So we have to be a wee bit careful about reference populations and that as well. So there is a wee bit of thinking in terms of the science and that around it as well. So I think Jason's idea of a review and having it in context of that will be quite useful as well.
And yeah, following on from that, what level of connectedness between these flocks is needed in order to enhance the accuracy of flock evaluation within these breeds or types of sheep? And I'll include section B in there without reading it out as part of that question.
Yeah, so there's quite a variety out there, but Julia and Dan setting up the the shedding, or we tend to think of it now as non-shearing because there are a variety of hair sheep as well as wool sheep. So setting up a group and actively shearing rams is brilliant. We saw an increase to 12 connected flocks this year out of the 17 in the group, and probably we can expect that to increase next year. So all of those things means when it becomes standard in NZGE, you'll already be well over the line. The composite part in the second question, I think we can consider whether we have a sort of a genetic vision of non-shearing, and that makes it easier to find, the variety of composites and animals that are out there.
Okay. Moving on to our next question, and I think we've kind of covered this off, but I'll ask the question, and the team could maybe just sort of summarise where we're at with this. Will BLG be directing some focus towards efficiency as a means of reducing GHGs? Fonterra banks are now using emissions intensity, kgs of product produced, units for CH4. Jason, Neville?
We have probably gone over that. Am I allowed to say this question was from Kate? I know that. Singing that song, yep. And I don't disagree with your song. Again, I hesitate to get too deep into the complication of this, but from a government point of view, and I know we don't necessarily want, we're operating as individuals here, but from a government point of view, methane intensity or emissions intensity is actually not what they necessarily want, because that means that we will produce more from the same amount of feed with the same amount of methane, which is not a bad thing, right? It's good for our profitability. They actually want us to reduce methane. So we can go round and around on that argument, and Dan's going to say something in a minute. But in general, yes, everything we already do enhances feed efficiency of the system, because basically that's what animal breeding and genetics is about. We could make some more gains on feed efficiency by measuring intake, or at least I believe we can. But there is that overall thing there about reducing. What we actually need to do from an industry messaging point of view, and maybe from a market access point of view, is produce less methane per kilo of feed eaten, as well as produce more per kilo of feed, produce more product per kilo of feed eaten. So there are two slightly different goals tied up in that statement. But yeah, so the short answer is yes, I support going as hard as we can on efficiency, but we still need that methane part as well. But Dan was going to say something.
I can't add too much, to be honest, but I guess there's just a little nuance to be careful of too, efficiency and our farm system's efficiency on a world scale, when you look at how other people produce their food, is actually not that flash, because it's pasture-based, right? So we need to be really careful that we don't sell ourselves down the street in this argument. And, Fonterra and Co., they're playing with fire, quite frankly. The banks, so Beef and Lamb New Zealand's provided some information to one of the banks, I forget which, who were heading down this road as well, and actually have convinced them that it's not actually going to achieve what they want to achieve, and they've walked back from that. So I completely agree with the farm level efficiency stuff that Jason's just talked about, but we also need to be a little bit careful that we don't have that unintended consequence of trapping ourselves in the efficiency argument.
I just see that we're the only country in the world that's potentially facing a methane tax. And great work has been done with the pack trailers, and thank you to everybody that's been involved in all of that. I'm just hoping that we can start to also look at some things that we can put in front of commercial farmers today that is tangible, and the uptake can be immediate instead of sort of that slower burn, and genetics is part of that package. So I completely take on board everything that's been said here today. And we've got, just thank you to everybody that's put on these couple of days. I'm going to go away really encouraged that a lot of things are happening that we've been asking for a long time, so that's very well appreciated. We've got money towards facial eczema and parasitism. healthy animals are lower emitters. So just appealing to beef and lamb that we just keep looking at these other ways of reducing greenhouse gases in ways that are more tangible potentially in the short term for commercial farmers. So thanks for everything, and let's just keep our eyes open as we look at other tools.
Well said, Kate.
Just we do need to be careful here because the supermarkets are actually, through their scope 3, are going to push all that cost back on us. And so we can't drop the torch on it. And their aim is to not have to pay anything themselves and load all that cost onto farmers themselves. So efficiency's still got to be right up there.
Yeah, a very complex topic, and one that, you know, this is going to be tricky to continue to be tricky to navigate. But it's great that all of you people are in this room, and with the passion that we're seeing from you breeders, because that's how we can address this and get the best outcome for our farmers out there. So the next question. Feed efficiency. Some sheep have been measured as part of progeny tests. It would be great to have more discussion and explanation around these results, and also discussion on how this trait can be measured, incorporated in stud breeding programs. And that came from Robert Peacock, and I'm assuming that they will get Jason. I'll just make a comment that Dan shared an insight to me when he travelled with Jason overseas, that Jason is somewhat of a star in the science world around feed efficiency. He said it was kind of weird. We'd walk into buildings and people were poking their head out the door and saying, wow, that's Jason Archer, that's the feed efficiency guy. So Jason, I'll hand this to you.
It wasn't quite like that. And if it was anything that was remotely like that, was me just dining off my past 30 years of stuff that I did 30 years ago, and haven't done anything like that recently. Right, so it's a bit hard to know where to start with that question. Discussion, explanation around these results, and I'm trying to think about where the results have actually, they must have come out. In the low input, yep. Can I throw it back to you, Robin, and say what would you like to know about those results? And I'm looking at Tricia because she's
well, it's a while since I've looked at those results, but I mean, with sort of feed intake, and you get feed intake, you get net feed intake, you get residual feed intake. Sometimes negative is better, sometimes positive is better. Just basic explanations like that. I can't remember what format those results were in, whether they were net feed or residual feed, I can't remember. But I mean, the main thing is, and it's, I mean, that question was put out on the form 2 weeks ago, and we've discussed a bit of feed efficiency since then, yesterday. But I mean, it's the appetite or possibility of stud breeders measuring feed efficiency in the foreseeable future. Is it going to be something that's incorporated into the CPT, like it was done in the low input trial, but as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been done in the CPT much or at all?
So to go back, we've been doing feed efficiency for nearly a decade. The first 1,000 animals that went through the feed intake facility were CPT, Flock 2638 and the methane selection lines, and so that was over 3 years that we put those 1,000 through. The low input with the next kind of cohort, Focus Genetics with the Future Sheep program have had some going through over the last few years, but we have successfully had funding as part of an international consortia. Jason and I haven't met to actually formally agree that the CPT is going to be measured, but what I put forward is for the this year's cohort and next year's cohort of the CPT lambs, we will be able to measure 200 lambs for each one of those cohorts, with some of them going through the CT scanner to get full body comp as well. So the trait that we have been reporting within those up until this point has been the residual feed intake trait. So that is the concept of you can have two animals that are the same weight and growing at the same rate, and they can be eating up to 20% difference in feed for those same production outcomes. We know that having some estimate, and we do ultrasound scan, but ideally with CT scan, that body composition has a quite significant role in some of that feed efficiency type work. So I have presented at the low input progeny test on it, but I think we could maybe look to do a online thing to just give a bit of an update, given it does seem to be a revised interest in that area. So.
Yeah, and look, I think if I take one message from your question, Robert, and thinking about it, and it's, you know, Tricia particularly has got a bunch of records there now, but the question then remains, how do we take this wider in the industry and, you know, make those results more systemised or more routinely available rather than just, you know, publishing a single report coming out of a progeny test trial. So that's probably something that we can, you know, Tricia and I and others can put our heads together on and sort of create a bit of a roadmap as to where we might go. I guess it does, the assumption behind that is that that we all want this, or enough people want it. And in terms of the industry benefit from that, or you being able to use that information in your own flocks, I guess there's one, genomics. So do we have enough of a reference population to be able to use genomics, and then how far would that reference population extend to have any accuracy at all? But then the second thing would be, okay, what is the opportunity for you as stud breeders to start measuring this trait? And it is a really challenging trait to measure on farm, to be frank. My background in New South Wales, we tried to get people measuring it on farm, and this was in the late 90s or early 2000s, which ages me a bit. And in essence, it didn't work. Like in Australia, there's probably, I don't know, Dan's probably over these figures a bit more than me, but there's probably 2 or 3 breeders that have got significant, you know, they've invested in facilities and are measuring it on farm in Australia. The rest of the data basically comes through essentially reference populations. So the, you know, Angus Australia run a large progeny test every year. I'm talking cattle now. And I don't know what's happening in sheep in Australia. I'll throw to Dan in a sec. I'll give you 2 minutes warning this time, Dan. So the data is still coming from reference populations, first and foremost in Australia. US a little bit, US and Canada a little bit different because they feed a lot of their bulls anyway. But even then, probably a significant amount of the data probably comes from reference and research. So, yeah, we'd need to do a fair bit of thinking. However, I would say, you know, in New Zealand, and again, I'm talking cattle, but this is the opportunity to move into sheep. You know, there are 2 breeders now that have installed feed intake facilities, one on the North Island, one on the South Island, and then they are opening up their facilities for other people to use. And I know you, Robert, along with 3 other Hereford breeders, are taking that opportunity as we speak. And good on you for doing that. And we're actually taking the opportunity in our beef cattle progeny test program to get some feed intake data as well using that. Do I see everyone in this room running a set of feed intake recorders? I'd love to see it, but I don't think it's going to happen. So, Dan, well, you jump in, and then the question I'm going to ask Dan is, what's happening in sheep and feed efficiency in Australia?
Mm-hmm. And kind of just following on from Jason's comments, I guess the issue, and we've kind of heard about it this morning, is the way, like, if we are putting some animals through the CPT, it's going to give us a spot of one sire from anybody's property. So we're not actually getting the variation within a flock. We're just going to be looking at spot indicators, but we will be able to use it to kind of inform what level of variation we're actually seeing and everything. So whilst, like, in theory, the CPT is meant to be about connectedness for everybody measuring those traits on their own properties. So in this case, we're just using it to give some insight. But yeah, ideally we would be looking to individual breeders, but it comes at a significant cost. So we just have to
Dan.
Yeah, so in Australia, we're just starting to ramp up our capacity to measure feed intake, feed efficiency. We've got some research projects and a little bit of existing data, but I don't think we've invested enough historically, and we've just started, especially in WA, there's some measurements being collected now, and we're establishing another facility at UNE in Armidale to try and get more measurements, particularly on those resource flock animals I mentioned yesterday. But I think as part of the methane piece, we need to get more measurements of feed intake. It's important for a number of reasons, obviously, and pretty critical to make balanced genetic improvement going forward. So we're trying to invest a lot more in this area and learning about how to deal with these complex traits together will be an important part of that journey in my eyes.
Just a shout out to our Aussie cousins, actually. I know they have their LAMX conference coming up in a couple of months. Dan can probably tell us exactly when it is. But I was privileged enough to go to that while I was on the board of Beef and Lamb a few years back. And it was, if you're into sheep, it was a fantastic event to attend. So when is that, Dan, exactly?
Early August, 7th to 9th August.
7th to 9th of August. And where, Ferg?
Adelaide.
In Adelaide. So it'll be a good trip. So, but yeah, I can highly recommend it. When I went, it was a fantastic conference, and they had some great data available. What's happening in the sheep industry.
And for those that like red wine, so I grew up in Adelaide, right? It's not a bad region of Australia.
So we've got one last pre-submitted question here. Looks fairly simple. Is there any work being done to be able to export semen to Australia again? Neville, Jason.
I'll take that one. Probably the blunt answer is no.
I thought that might be it.
So it's, and I'll get the history here is the border shut when New Zealand imported some sheep milking genetics from France, and then Australia decided that was going to be a backdoor way for them to import scrapie, and that's fair enough. But I don't think we have scrapie. We've kept it out. So there's a politically incorrect answer, but I'll give you the politically correct answer. I think it's going to be a while before that's reviewed by the AQUIS, Australian Quarantine Something Service. And yeah, maybe in time that might happen, but I think there's my very third-hand understanding is that we've been given like the stiff arm fend off. So, yeah. Okay.
So, yep, we've got plenty of questions flowing through on Slido here. So, well done to everyone for doing that. But first, foremost, will there be more workshops for breeders, especially for the new breeders or young breeders in the near future?
I would hope so, in some form. So I guess I talked yesterday about being excited about having a new position that we can create, and that position, I went into it yesterday a bit, but that really is about developing our extension strategy in genetics, and I'm really conscious that up until now our extension, it's not that we haven't had any strategy, but we just haven't really been able to resource it, and Sarah has it as a part of her job, but it's the third part of her job, and the first and second part are the first, second, and third part are operations, and then probably the fourth part's sheep breeder for them. And this is no reflection on Sarah. She does as much as she can, and does do workshops for. Where is Sarah? Sorry. She's away. Oh, she's away at the farm. Yeah, exactly to my point, right? So she's busy doing stuff. And so really we need to resource this with more intent. And that's what this extra position, which, grateful to the Beef and Lamb board for signing off on a couple of positions. I think it's been to board, Dan. It's in our budget anyway. Yeah, so that will give us the ability to do more. I'm sure workshops are part of it. We've been talking with Ferg about doing some online type workshops. And I guess the concept has been that we might be able to do that by engaging with the breeder groups and doing it in a group sort of setting, webinar, like online webinar type stuff, and sort of making them short, but as in, like 3 or 4 sessions or something like that. And then people might be sick of us after that. Who knows? I think that idea is still there. And actually, to be fair, that really came from our Sheep Genetics Advisory Group. So we were thinking about a different way of doing workshops, more physical, and they said, well, who's gonna come, who's got time, rah, 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 why don't you try online? So our advisory group has, they give us some good suggestions and from time to time we listen to them.
Excellent. So yes, there's going to be some more workshops. Is there any
Long-winded
intention
answer.
to update the best practice guide for sheep farmers on the SIL website? This should be a living document with updates as they are required. This would help with data quality. Sharon.
Yes, it was always intended that it would be a living document and that would be the starting point and it would be extended. I think too, when we get the data quality tools, then that's a whole new section that can be added. And with the increased extension potential coming and workshops, we need resources for that. So I can definitely see best practice needs to be reconfigured to support that extension.
We can genetically compare beef cattle from Australia and New Zealand. How far away from this in the sheep industry is it on the radar at all?
It really comes down to do that you need genetic links between the countries, and with the close of the border, at least the one-way closure of the border to semen, our genetic links are probably deteriorating to almost non-existent now. So it's pretty challenging. So probably the blunt answer is no. It's not on the radar because there's probably a lot of other things that we could be doing and getting better bang for our buck out of.
How regularly does, I'm assuming this is New Zealand maternal worth, get reviewed? And is there plans to review it soon and the economic weighting assigned to the traits of growing importance, FEC, fairness, resilience, etc.?
I'll grab this one. So the cycle is around about every 5 years. So the last one was done in 2022, which would mean if everything goes as the normal cycle will be 2027, that it will be done. You have to kind of remember that what we're trying to do is get something there is some stability. We're trying to look forward whenever we do it for the next 5 years, so we don't want to be changing it all the time. That will re-rank animals as the relative emphasis of things just go up and down. So 5 years seems to be around about right. But if something changes drastically, then there's certainly the option to be able to look at an individual trait, on or an individual gold trait group between that. But yeah, 5 years is the normal. You also have to remember that, we're making one index for the entire industry when we're talking about the New Zealand maternal worth. We're not going to keep everybody happy, so there'll always be some people that say, well, it doesn't suit my system. And, so really the solution there is some kind of custom index that people are doing, which is available and can be implemented, through the reporting. But, the short answer, which I've gone way beyond, is 2027 will be the next time.
And the very short addition to that is not an insignificant amount of work to review those, and you sort of need to do them as a package.
Cool. Who is the SIL advisory group and how often are the members turned over? Are there any members in the room that are willing to put their hands up?
Yeah, please put your hands up.
Do you want to stand up? Why don't you stand
Yeah,
up?
stand up.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members in the room.
Richard Schofield has left, so he was here yesterday. Ross Richards is on the group, but unfortunately with some health issues he couldn't make it. But he did sit through a whole day of Zoom meeting with us the other day. And Barbara Beckett is a second bureau on that group. How often does it turn over? We actually had that discussion on Monday. We have an annual. we meet 4 times a year, and 3 times a year it's online and probably about 2 hours in duration, and then we have an annual session, and Monday was our annual session. And we discussed this. We have 1 vacant position at the moment due to a resignation, but we did talk about being more mindful or more intent about turnover. We're getting great advice from this group at the moment, but we do recognise that actually there does need to be some turnover just to be healthy. There's no one on there that I'd want to kick off, but we might have to make sure that there is some turnover. The position that we probably have at the moment that we probably really need another commercial farmer on the group. So it's actually quite hard to find the right people from commercial farmers, because a lot of the discussion, and talk to the group members, they'll tell you this, it gets quite technical. So you need a pretty good understanding of the sort of issues that we're dealing with and the genetics, but we want that commercial farmer voice in there to bring us back to commercial reality, I guess, at times, and also to think about how we communicate with the commercial farmer as well as you as breeders. So yeah, that's one position we'll be looking for, but we do have on our to-do list from last week, well, not last week, this week, is to actually start thinking about how we maybe kick someone off the group just to make room for someone else to come onto the group, as horrible as that sounds.
Cool. Good question here. I might throw this one to you, Dan. If Taste Pure Nature is moving to MIA management, and it is, how BLG ensure knowledge on market signals and trends flow back to New Zealand sheep studs so we can be proactive about needing to adapt, e.g. traits that affect product quality, animal welfare, etc.
I agree, it's an excellent question. And actually not something I've given a lot of thought to, thinking about the transfer of Taste Pure Nature particularly. So I'm going to take that away and think about how we do that, because I don't have an answer for that right now, but I think it's an excellent question, a really good point.
I guess I would say probably, I don't think we probably directly got a whole lot of information from Taste Pure Nature that's flowed back into what we do, rightly or wrongly, like that could be wrong. But, you know, it's part of industry awareness, it's a part about getting out there, it's part about, you know, doing some international stuff so that we sort of find out what's happening out there, what people are thinking. You get that information from a range of places. That sounds like just an advert for me to go on another trip, but I want to stay home for a long time at the moment. I've done enough of that.
We've got another bit to add too, actually. So we do, of course, still have our insights team doing their work, and so we'll continue to do those ad hoc market looks that we've done. So in the past, we've done one about genetic engineering, I think. Georgia's one about regenerative agriculture. There's one about alternative protein. So we'll carry on doing those individual pieces that are about helping not just our breeder community, but the whole farming industry be aware of what's coming down the track or thinking about what's coming down the track. So we'll carry on doing those pieces, and they'll absolutely still be available to everyone.
And I could just share with you, you know, the connection between MIA and Beef and Lamb these days is incredibly strong. The senior management teams are in very close contact. So if there was any really clear signal coming, I'm pretty sure it would get to Beef and Lamb really quickly. I think you can be pretty confident of that. What century is the base year going to move? What does Lampran do?
Greg? So so Dan's got a 2-minute warning. He's going to get asked again. There are 2 things that are actually being asked in this question. The base year adjustment, it can mean what year do we compare our breeding values to, which at the moment is 1995. So we set the average breeding value to 0 in 1995, and it just tracks up there, hopefully, if we're making progress. The other thing is how far back do we take data? So do we include all the data in the genetic evaluation, or do we set a year that we cut it off? If I can address the last one first, we've sort of looked at that over the years, and we've always been able to get away with including it, and Michael's just implementing, a version that means that we'll be able to, that should be, able to continue. That data probably doesn't add much, but it does add something. And, because things are always changing, it's nice to keep things stable and keep that data in. So there's no plan at the moment, at least not that I'm aware of, to be dropping data from the genetic evaluation. The one where what year do we compare it against, lots of different genetic evaluations do different things, and you'll hear what LambPlan do. We've debated it. All it does is shift the breeding values up or down, and the breeders that we speak to tend to be pretty evenly divided about whether they want to have that big reduction, like move it forward 5 years and have, I'm making a number up, but all your indexes drop by 1,000 cents or whatever the number is. And some people are really tuned in that, an animal is worth so much if it's got an index of a certain value, and you're suddenly going to take that away. And I've trained all my suppliers to know what an index value means in terms of price. And then we've got people who are very passionate that want it, that an animal, indexes are getting too high, let's pull them down. So because we're reasonably even, the decision has been if you don't have a clear mandate, then the status quo is probably the best thing. So the current thing is that we won't be changing the base year, but we're listening, for feedback.
Yeah, so we deal with all those challenges. Historically, you had the base set at 1990. They were all set to zero, and we have tried not to change that. But as we've evolved in analysis, just like Jason was describing, every year we change analysis, and that actually changes the merit of the recent animals compared to 1990. So what we've actually chosen to do over time is let that base drift and actually keep current animals about the same each time we make analysis changes. So we change the way we set the base to try and minimise the impact on commercial ram buyers when we make changes to the analysis, which is a challenge for ram breeders, as you know, to market rams when the breeding values are changing, including indexes. But we actually do want to remove data from the analysis and evolve our analysis in the future to deal with the volume of data. So we're going to have to deal with this issue and ask the exact same questions that Neville was just talking about, and working with industry to re-benchmark the average of all the breeding values and indexes, which will be very difficult. So, it's another good challenge to work on together to try and how to help breeders actually readjust their ram buying decisions with a different base in the analysis. It's not easy.
So we're running up to the end of our time, so we'll just cover off these last three questions and then we'll start to wrap up. And that top one is not a question. Earlier, it was said no work has been done in regards to birth weight and lambing ease. In the visual sheep scores document, a lambing difficulty score can be given, but won't be used to generate an EBV.
At this point, that is a true statement.
So there's always that chicken and egg, and that people want a BV, but you can't have a BV without a data set. So the visual scores guide is partly to try and get a standardised recording system, and then you get some data, and that gives you the potential to do something with it in future. But I've certainly taken on board Mark's comment about lambing ease, and some people have been recording birth weights as well.
One from Andrew Tripp here. Can the original SGIC meat quality index be made available on Improved Breeder as well as the new BLG MQI?
So David and I have just been struggling to figure out who's the right person to answer this, and I think it's actually an improved question. So Andrew, you're asking whether there's a slider there. We reviewed the meat quality, the economic weights, and we changed the two that the SIGC group have been using, and then put weights on the other two traits. Oh, it's breeder. Oh. So can you fit a custom index in that?
Yes, we can put a custom index available, so an improved breeder. So I don't see any difficulty doing that.
Last one here. Will exit codes ever be used? Some stubs have been carefully recording them for many years, thinking we would get BVs.
want to say yes or no to that. So we're talking about stayability. Stayability is a really difficult trait to analyse, and partly because exit codes are often very poorly recorded, and that undermines the whole stayability type of analysis approach. Will they ever be used? Well, I don't know. I can't give you a positive or negative on that, sorry.
So stayability was my master's project with John McEwen, and there are people that have been recording it diligently, and there is quite a bit of data in the system. Every year at March, when we do our priority setting, I bring stayability to the table, and every year it doesn't make it to the top. But you can see, you know, V6, which is, you know, giving better data to every breeder on the system. Those sorts of things do take priority.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been sort of challenged with is looking at, you know, where we should invest our time. And we've just applied for an MB program to really look at that, because we recognise that it's a really, really hard trait, and it actually needs some real sort of innovation and science behind it. So we're sort of on the case. So yeah, don't quit on those exit fates just yet, because we would really like to see that as a trait that has some real attention in the next few years.
Thank you.
So for this one, just that the point that a lot of traits that we're measuring now weren't measured in 1995. Yes, that's true, but we still get a prediction of what the animals in 1995 had, and all it is a way to lift it up or down. And what we like to see is we want to make sure that that people don't like seeing negative BVs, or they struggle to understand a negative BV when when it's a trait that increases. So we try and lift the BVs so they have spread above zero. So in a way, it's just kind of an arbitrary thing that by definition, we have set it to 1995. So there isn't actually any problem having 1995 as the base year for traits that weren't recorded then.
Open? Yeah. I just want to pipe up on that is two things. Is the first is this is a message for the breeders to the wider community, is knowing how much progress you have made over the last 20 or 30 years essentially underpins the argument for you to get $3 million a year from the levy income. So shifting it up and only having it for the last 5 years is probably a very, very silly thing to do, right? That's the first thing, right? And it's to the government as well. Beef and Lamb put out a little booklet each year, and it's actually 1991 that they have the production figures for, and the current production figures, and you had the CEO of Beef and Lamb New Zealand using those figures and saying genetics provided this much benefit over that time. So you need ready access to those figures. The second thing there is rebase year in 1995, many current traits were not recorded. That's true. But we can estimate that genetic change for those traits that are not recorded because the CPT uses the old sires from 20 or 30 years ago, and it records the new traits like PAC or methane. So we can estimate what the industry is actually making, and it should be making better use of that data.
Thanks, John. I agree with both your points there. The other thing about just making 1995 the base year for those new traits, it just helps in communication to be consistent. So you can just make a blanket statement, say everything's compared back to 1995. You don't have to say, well, this trait's 1995, this trait's 2007, this one's 2003. It's just simple.
Okay, I think that's a very nice place for us to wrap up, and thank you to John for I think we just got some very sage advice from someone that's been around a while. So a big thanks to the team up here for answering all those questions so eloquently.